Airlines, their costs are going up. Southwest Airlines would be a very interesting case to look at. You could look at their labor costs on both an absolute basis and as a percentage of total over the past 10 years, and you'd see their labor costs going up. Now, they're still making money, but their labor costs are starting to approximate the older companies. So they're still deriving efficiencies in some other places, but maybe not there. So problem number one, it's all about age. Problem number two, little supplier competition. Another paradox. In these open deregulated markets like the EU, flying is cheaper than it's ever been. And you all are the beneficiaries. How many people fly in Ryanair or EasyJet? Yeah, everybody goes, oh, that's cheap. And of course, British Airways, to a certain degree, has to match the Ryanair price. Very often they do that. In order to give you the cheap price, let's take BA. They have to buy, all the things that they have to buy, they buy from imperfect markets. So a paradox, the output for you, the output of the airline industry, cheap fares. The inputs are all purchased from imperfect markets, from labor unions, which are monopoly providers, right? That's by definition, when you're a union, you know, British Airways would love to buy its pilot labor on an open market. They would pay probably 30 to 50% less for their pilot labor. But they have a contract with their union that prohibits them from doing that. Monopoly infrastructure providers. If you want to land in London, you're dealing really essentially with one company and one provider. Okay, maybe not talking about Heathrow, if you go to Luton. That's a bad example. If you want to land at Chicago O'Hare, monopoly. So that monopoly provider, the operator of the airport at O'Hare, at Chicago O'Hare, in the city of Chicago, not a really efficient group. There's no need for them to discipline costs. There's nothing to keep them from raising costs all the time. Monopoly provider of infrastructure. So you finally have enough money to buy a new airplane. How many companies manufacture big new airplanes? That's right. Now you guys know, as young people, you know, when there's only 2 stores, you're not going to get a good price. Right? There's 50 stores, you're going to get a good price. 2 stores make airplanes. And by the way, they come without engines. Very impractical. So you've got to go shopping for engines, and there's only 3 makers, and it goes on and on and on. Big oil companies, caters. If you want to put food on the airplane, you know, if you're flying to Dubai from Heathrow, there are like 2 catering companies you can deal with at Heathrow. You're not going to get a good deal. And on and on. And there are a lot of people that think that actually this problem of little supplier competition, that the input markets are almost all imperfect, is a bigger problem than the problem of age. Problem number 1, which we just talked about. Wait, there's more. Problem number 3, high fixed costs. Typically, and as a very general statement, fixed expense 70 to 80% of total. Ooh, that's a bad place to be. Because that means, as a simple matter, if Lufthansa doesn't fly tomorrow because of a strike, no revenue comes in because they're not flying, but 80% of the bills come in for labor, for aircraft rent, or leases, for aircraft payments, for ground rent at Frankfurt or Munich, or whatever. Now, if only 20 or 30% of your expense is variable, you're going to follow this classic microeconomics law that you may have learned at some time, that a firm pursues any activity that covers all of its variable expense and makes a small contribution to fixed. Right? In the airline business, that means that an airline will operate a flight at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The flight will not make money on a fully allocated basis. It will not cover all of its costs, and it will certainly not generate a profit. But if it can cover the small percentage that is variable, then you fly the flight. And every airline, whether it's new or old, green or red, wherever it's based, every airline makes that decision. Economically rational by itself, but not when you aggregate it up either to the level of the firm or the level of the industry. Simply put, you want to fly the asset because sitting on the ground, the airplane is earning nothing. And you're paying on it. This is a big problem. One of the things that this leads to is this sort of blends into this next problem. that urge to fly the flight is going to structurally create an overcapacity problem just by itself. But there's some other drivers of imbalance between supply and demand. You've got this reality that demand varies temporally, time of day of week, seasonality, so you have a very lumpy temporal pattern in demand. The airline would like to fly the airplane in the middle of the night, but you don't want to fly in the middle of the night, unless you're on your way back to India, or home from the United States, or whatever that is. You've got this perishability problem, like bananas in the supermarket. Right? When the bananas turn spotted and black, you can't sell them, right? When we close the door on the flight and there's open seats, it's wasted. We're still wasting about 20%, which is a huge amount to throw away. Very frustrating, by the way, that I can't write on the... So we're wasting 20%. Now, actually, that's an improvement. In the old days, during the regulated period in the US, airlines routinely wasted 40% of their capacity. So I guess we've made progress if we're only wasting a fifth. But imagine a manufacturer throwing away 1/5 of their output. You cannot shrink to survive. So typically the airline business follows macroeconomic cycles. So not surprisingly, after the big Wall Street meltdown in September 2008, airlines very quickly got into huge financial trouble. Because demand declined, but they couldn't get their costs up either quickly enough or commensurate with the decrease in revenue. So demand drops like that, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Airlines, there's a lag. And one of the things that happens, this you cannot shrink to survive, is all airlines, old ones and new ones, organize their frontline workers on a seniority basis. You know what seniority means? The longer you stay, the more you get paid. So when you shrink, who gets laid off? The younger workers that are less well paid. The older workers who are more well paid stay on, and so your labor costs average up. Market entry during the regulated period was impossible. And today it's too easy. Anybody can start an airline. People get these goofy ideas, we're going to start an airline. Why would you do this? And yet they do. And but the converse is really interesting too. Why is market? So if entry is very easy, by contrast, market exit is very hard. Have you noticed they never disappear? They never go away. Chapter 11 in the United States allows them not to go away. The last big airline to fail in the United States was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Pan Am. Why don't they ever go away? The short answer, we could talk about this for a long time, the short answer is because of the capital structure of the industry, the assets are worth more to everyone as a going concern than they would be split up. When US Airways went bankrupt in 2004, one of the things that bankruptcy allows you to do is tear up your aircraft leases. So they called GE, which is a major lessor of aircraft, the day after they filed bankruptcy, and they said, you hear this sound? That's the sound of us tearing up your lease. We're going to give you the airplane back. And GE said, oh, don't do that. And they said, oh, you don't want the airplane back? Well, here's how much we're going to pay you for it. And it was a tiny fraction of what they were getting before. So they never disappear. They should, because if they did disappear, we would be able to shrink supply. And this is an industry that is marvelously responsive to the relationship between supply, demand, and price. If you restrict supply, prices will go up. There are some people who think that the basic problem is aircraft production, meaning if there's only two producers of big airplanes and they're both subsidized, which they are, Airbus is subsidized, Boeing is subsidized, the nature of the subsidy differs. In the case of Airbus, it's a more direct subsidy. In the case of Boeing, it's a more subtle and indirect subsidy paid for by taxpayers who invest in military technology, which finds its way into the civilian sector. But the reality is, these companies, there's only two of them, and they're both subsidized. So maybe they're cranking out too many new airplanes. Maybe we don't need all that capacity. Well, that's a discussion for another time. Problem number 5, huge capital needs. These things are expensive. 777, 160 million, 737, 70 million. You need a lot of them if you're a big airline. So where do you get all that capital? Now, here's a more interesting aspect of the sort of capital structure. It's an industry that is simultaneously capital-intensive, labor-intensive, and energy-intensive. So contrast the airline industry with manufacturing. Ever since James Watt invented the steam engine in this country, in the middle of the 18th century, firm owners have invested capital to save on labor, right? As soon as Watt invented a steam engine, some clever guy said, we'll hook up the steam engine to a loom. And we won't need workers weaving fabric. The machine will do it. They burned down the factory, if you know anything about economic history, but that was only temporary. Now, in the airline industry, we don't have that opportunity to replace people with machines. Well, you do, but over a long time horizon. So, for example, newer airplanes have only 2 pilots, and the first jet airplanes that I remember flying on years ago had 4. We've gone from 4 to 3 to 2, but we still have 2 highly paid and not working very hard pilots. Could we go to 1? You say, well, what happens if he has a heart attack? Well, but maybe the savings and fares would be good enough. Could we go to 0? Maybe. I used to say, in your lifetime, not in mine, because I don't know if you know this, right now, the United States Air Force has planes flying around above Afghanistan without any pilots. Maybe that will come in your lifetime. But for now, we don't have those substitutability abilities. A robot does not overhaul the jet engine. Now you think, well, robots are taking over in car assembly and these other things. No, there are no robots in the maintenance space. And as a single kind of a fun data point, a mechanic at American Airlines overhaul base that works on a jet engine with a little bit of overtime and about 10 years of seniority earns $100,000 US per year. That's good money for a skilled. Now it's a good guy, these people, this mechanic, she knows a lot. She's licensed, she's really good, but 100K, I mean, that's nice, huh? Nice. Okay, so labor, and then what about energy? When energy gets expensive, if you're a manufacturer, and you need a lot of energy to make your product, when energy gets expensive, you look at your manufacturing process and you say, how can we save on energy? So you invest capital, right, to save on energy. And again, we have that opportunity in the airline business. Older airplanes that flew medium distances 40 years ago had 3 engines and now they have 2, saving gas. This whole American Airlines aircraft order from last summer was all predicated on fuel savings. You say to yourself, my God, how can a almost bankrupt company, which was what American was last summer, and now a fully bankrupt company, how can they buy all these airplanes? Well, the whole justification has been on the basis of saving fuel. So who will supply, and this is something that we talked about with the team, an industry that cannot generate profits, who supplies the capital? Or as I said provocatively an hour ago, who would be stupid enough? Some guy, some firm in the city? Why would they do it? But somehow they managed to find a way. When American Airlines announced their aircraft order in July of this year, the largest aircraft order in history, somebody asked the CFO, what about financing? They said, we got it all lined up. And you just scratch your head. How did they do this? And this is not just, ladies and gentlemen, this is not just American Airlines. This is the industry worldwide. Since inception, if you add up all of the airlines' annual results in all of the world since the 1920s, it's generated a cumulative loss. Or as a finance friend of mine says, you've destroyed capital. Now, I'm a marketing guy, can you tell? It makes me feel really bad. We're in the business, I'm in the business of making business deals possible and vacations and hugs and all the other things that airplanes do, and we've destroyed capital. It's true. Problem number 6, and then we'll get to questions 6 and 7, we'll do these quickly. Government influence. There is no industry that has historically been, and that continues to be, as dependent on, as influenced by government. Influence over key aspects of the business. Now, we've already talked about this legacy of economic regulation. The fact that the older companies with higher costs have through restructuring, have through brain power, have